In the long evolution of Western philosophy, Arthur Schopenhauer stands as a highly pioneering and subversive thinker. He was the first philosopher to systematically inquire into the value of existence, profoundly integrate Eastern and Western modes of thinking, and incorporate art into the core research of serious philosophy. With his extremely cold pessimism and a logically consistent, comprehensive system of thought, he has become an unavoidable spiritual coordinate in the history of Western philosophy. At the opening of his magnum opus, he declared resoundingly, "The world is my representation." This assertion laid the cornerstone of his entire philosophical edifice. Born in 1788 in what is now Gdansk, Poland, Schopenhauer moved with his family to Hamburg, Germany at the age of 5. A wealthy merchant family had preordained a life path for him to follow in his father's footsteps. His father was a renowned international merchant, and the family expected him to step into the business world and continue its glory. Yet, from an early age, he felt no enthusiasm for commerce. The light of academia and speculation was always his true calling. A European tour arranged to prepare him for a business career, far from converting him to trade, confronted him with the widespread suffering and poverty across the continent. This direct gaze into the truth of existence completely shattered his illusions about worldly success and strengthened his resolve to devote himself to academia, dissect the logic of the world's operation from its origin, and question why existence is permeated with negativity. In 1809, Schopenhauer resolutely departed from his family's plan and enrolled at the University of Göttingen, devoting himself fully to philosophical studies in his junior year. The following year, he transferred to the University of Berlin to study under the leading philosophers of the time, only to realize bitterly that academic philosophy was mired in deliberately obscure, empty talk, detached from the real survival issues of humanity and bound by theological shackles that stripped it of the edge of independent thought, all utterly incompatible with his intellectual pursuits. He broke away from the rigid academic system and spent 10 years in solitary contemplation and writing, building his intellectual mansion in years of obscurity. He once stated bluntly, "Either to be commonplace or to be solitary." This solitude was the prerequisite for his intellectual freedom. By the age of 30, Schopenhauer had completed the ultimate construction of his philosophical system, with 2 works establishing his lifelong academic foundation. On the Fourfold Root of the Principle of Sufficient Reason, published in 1813, laid the logical groundwork for his philosophy. The World as Will and Representation, released in 1819, synthesized metaphysics, epistemology, ethics, aesthetics, and value judgments into a closed, unified, and unchanging system of thought for his entire life. This magnum opus would later become a central classic of Western philosophy, profoundly reshaping the course of Western thought. Yet it was neglected and unappreciated by the academic world for decades after its publication. In his 30s and 40s, Schopenhauer juggled university lectures, French to English prose translation, and intermittent writing. Yet he achieved nothing. His lectures were sparsely attended, his translations ignored, and his philosophical writings completely overlooked. It was not until he neared 50 that he gained a modicum of attention. The publication of his essays and aphorisms in 1851 finally brought him long overdue fame, an honor that accompanied him until his death in 1860 at the age of 72. Schopenhauer's philosophy was rooted in Kant's transcendental idealism, and he regarded himself as the completer of Kant's philosophical system. He put forward his core thesis: The world we perceive and experience is merely a representation, constructed by the mind through the senses and cognitive forms, and we can never reach the true nature of the thing in itself beyond conscious experience. His subversive innovation beyond Kant lies in this. Beyond experience, there are no multiple objects, only a single, unified reality that transcends time and space and strips away all objectification, the primordial force that drives all things to exist. He took the lived experience of the physical body as a unique entry point to decode this primordial force. The human body is the only entity in the world that possesses both objective representation and inner subjective experience, and its core is an unconscious, ceaseless drive towards survival, nourishment, and reproduction, which he named the will to live. He used a brilliant metaphor for this. The will is a strong blind man leaning on the shoulder of a sighted cripple. Thus, the world is divided into two parts. One is the plural world of representations perceived by consciousness, and the other is the singular force of will as the origin of existence. This is the core meaning of the world as will and representation. It is important to clarify that Schopenhauer's will is by no means human subjective intention or rational motivation, but a blind, purposeless, meaningless, unconscious drive whose only goal is self-preservation. All movement, struggle, consumption, and violent catharsis in the physical world are external expressions of the will, an eternal, insatiable force that forms the underlying logic of existence. While rooted in the Western philosophical tradition, Schopenhauer's philosophy deeply absorbed the core ideas of Hinduism and Buddhism. His understanding of the nature of the world and his judgment of the negative relationship between existence and the conscious self are highly consistent with the core tenets of Eastern religions, making him the first thinker to systematically and comprehensively integrate Eastern and Western philosophy. In line with Buddhist thought, his philosophy ultimately settled into a profound and unwavering pessimism. He stated plainly, "If suffering is not the direct and primary object of life, our existence is entirely meaningless. The world is filled with endless pain arising from the necessities of life. It is absurd to regard this pain as purposeless and accidental. Every individual misfortune seems exceptional, yet misfortune in general is the rule." He summed up the essence of existence with his famous pendulum theory. Life is like a pendulum, swinging back and forth between pain and boredom. Life is a ceaseless desire. Unfulfilled desire brings pain. Fulfilled desire brings boredom. Life thus sways between pain and boredom. In his view, the will to live is a violent, dominating force, and individual lives are its victims in the process of survival. Blinded by their own bodies and minds, they betray their fundamental interests and desires, becoming tools of the will. The will eternally craves, yet is never satisfied, and humans, as the embodied expression of the will, are trapped in an eternal cycle of desire, pursuit, frustration, emptiness. He thus asserted, "Human life is a mistake. Humans are beings of unquenchable desires and needs. Even when all needs are met, all one gains is a painless emptiness, leaving nothing but endless boredom. This is the naked truth of existence." To break free from the shackles of the will, Schopenhauer proposed two paths to liberation. First, immersion in the contemplation of art and philosophy. Second, the practice of asceticism. Asceticism demands renouncing all superfluous desires and self-indulgence, retaining only the bare minimum for survival. By self-denial, one cuts off the nourishment of the will, allowing it to turn against itself and ultimately dissolve. Yet he knew this method was too harsh for ordinary people, so he advocated that the average person should not cling to the pursuit of illusory happiness, but take the reduction of suffering as the core of life. He pointed out soberly, the rational man seeks not pleasure, but merely the absence of pain. In his philosophy, happiness is not the accumulation of joy and pleasure, but the reduction and freedom from pain. The safest way to avoid extreme misery is not to expect extreme happiness. Art and philosophy, by contrast, are a more universal and accessible path to liberation. He once praised, "Music is the true universal language that is understood everywhere." Great art strips away all illusions and embellishments to reach the essence and predicament of existence. Immersed in art, one gains a transcendent experience that temporarily relieves the heavy yoke of existence. For this idea, Schopenhauer became the first thinker to endow art with ultimate philosophical significance, and was later hailed as the philosopher of artists. Of course, Schopenhauer's thought contains inherent paradoxes of speculation. His attempt to define and judge the nature of existence beyond logical reason with systematic logical reason is itself an irreconcilable contradiction. The origin, source, and destiny of the will cannot be empirically verified, and resisting the will through asceticism is essentially a self-conflict of the will, not true transcendence. Friedrich Nietzsche, a philosopher deeply inspired by Schopenhauer, offered a radically different interpretation. The infinite cycle of desire and dissatisfaction caused by the will is not a shackle to existence, but the core driving force for human self-transcendence and growth, from which humans can find the meaning of life. Both interpretations possess profound intellectual depth, and there is no final verdict on which is right or wrong. Schopenhauer's life is a lamentable yet commonplace fate in the history of thought. The most valuable thinkers often sink into obscurity during their lifetimes, only to achieve immortality after death. The common hallmark of such figures is an uncompromising, unyielding persistence. They always defend the truth of the world as they see it, unmoved by worldly indifference. He once sighed, "Man can indeed do what he wants, but he cannot want what he wants." This clear awareness of the limits of the will made him adhere to his philosophical system throughout his life. Schopenhauer never deviated from the philosophical system he built in his 20s. Even when ignored by the world, he persisted in refining and consolidating his ideas. This brave perseverance finally left an invaluable intellectual treasure for humanity. His words are gloomy yet sincere, holding the utmost honesty about existence beneath pessimism. To some, his thought is cold and piercing. To others, it is like a glimmer of light in the darkness, bringing comfort, relief, and recognition. It reminds every soul facing suffering, we are not abnormal. Sorrow and suffering are not unfounded. We are merely placed in a tragic, absurd world where body and mind often turn against us. As the first philosopher to seriously interrogate the value of life and question the possibility of existential meaning through philosophical inquiry, Schopenhauer precisely captured the human spiritual dilemma in the age of rising agnosticism. As humanity hovered in the void of meaning, he faced the darkness and suffering of existence with unflinching courage, opening a brand new intellectual path for humanity to seek answers to existence from within.